My name is Benny Johnson. As some of you know, I've been struggling with addiction. However, I decided to change my life and went into recovery. I've started this podcast 90 Days Clean, and I want to take you along in my journey. What does lie ahead of me? Let me be frank. I do not know. Will I ever drink again? I do not know. This is how Stairway to Redemption was born. It is my search for answer in a real-time process of what is going to work for me. It is then my aspiration to help you figure out what's going to work for you. It is our journey together. Welcome to Stairway to Redemption. This week, my guest is Suzanne. Suzanne is the author of a book called Toxic Family, Transforming Childhood Trauma into Adult Freedom. A little bit about Suzanne. She was raised in a very challenging and chaotic family, the middle child of 5. She dealt with addiction, horrible relationships, and she shared her journey in her book, and she's sharing part of it in with us right now. I'll give you guys Suzanne. Suzanne, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing great, Benny. How are you?
Great. Thank you for doing this. I'm glad that we match on Podmatch. And so far, so good. I had great experience of meeting people on Podmatch. So here on the Stairway to Redemption, the first question is called the State of the Mind Address. It's a play on word with the State of the Union Address. I'm funny like that. It's basically how are you doing, but like something deeper than just fine. Like what's going on with your life lately?
Yeah, well, first let's go back to Podmatch because I don't want your listeners to think that's a dating app. It's not. It's actually matching podcast
yeah.
guests with hosts.
It didn't even cross my mind. Sorry. But yeah,
I know.
yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I am really happy to be here. And I have been listening, and addiction and addiction recovery and all the elements around it is something not just close to my heart, but something that I've had personal experience with. My sobriety date is November 24th, 1985, probably before most of your listeners were born.
Yeah, even me. I mean, I'm 33, so yeah, I was born in 1990, so yeah. Congrats,
Sobriety is like the first brick in creating a solid platform. And I feel if you have any issues with codependency, addiction, if it's a problem for you, just put it down because you need a level playing field. I really feel like this earth is a very intense classroom. It's a gift to be here, to move through everything that we do, but it's a lot easier when you're doing it with clarity and with sobriety, if possible.
That's amazing. So what's new with you lately? Do you still coach, or like are you still in the entertainment business?
So for a long while, I mean, I started in the entertainment industry. I started in an internship in arts management, which led me to work for a large global talent agency. And then I formed my own talent brokerage for matching celebrities to brands. And I was highly successful. So I was just getting sober when I created my first firm, matching celebrities to brands, and I was just extricating myself from an abusive relationship. The man held the purse strings, and I'm not proud, but I was terrified I would lapse back into that relationship, being newly sober, having 2.5 months of cash in the bank. But I had been sexually harassed in the workplace, and when I stood up to it, being sober, I was fired promptly, and I couldn't even though they say no changes in the first 90 days, I couldn't go be an assistant again. So I decided to launch my own firm. And my first challenge was to knock on the door of the factory to convince the modern artist Andy Warhol to do a commercial for Pontiac. And that's where I sort of made a name for myself. And that skill set ultimately led me into producing for television and for film. But sobriety was a big piece of it. I had my support system. And it was really scary not to pick up the first drink. I didn't really know anything about running my own business. And I just had to really rely on what I was learning as a sober woman. And I'm grateful that I had those opportunities.
Oh, that's amazing. And me too. I was a software programmer for like a entertainment media company, and like anything from launch parties to like Christmas parties, celebrities coming and go. Like the alcohol and drugs were like almost the standard, like it's crazy. So like how did you cope with that? Like at the beginning, what was your did you had a game plan whenever like you were going to like a launch party or like to like an event with your involving your talents? Because I'm bet the 80s also was rampant for cocaine and stuff. So like what was your game plan? How did you?
So I had this little phone book, like it was really small, and I taped money in the back of it because then they didn't have cell phones back then. You had to go to like a phone booth and put money in. But I put money in to make a phone call in case I needed to call another sober, recovering person when I was out at those parties. And I just continued with the mantra. I was terrified a vodka bottle was going to walk out of a bar and like dump itself down my throat when I first got clean and sober. I just was really scared. I did not want to go back to the same life that was mushrooming while I was active. So I was really almost to the point of hypervigilant. I went to meetings on a regular basis. I was very active in that whole world. And I just surrounded myself with a community of other people like me getting clean.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Like, we're going to come back to that, the importance of a fellowship and a community of like a support network to stay sober. But I wanted to start with, tell us more about you. Why this book, Toxic Family? I noticed myself that this is the first time in this podcast that there's an episode dedicated to the family dynamic, So what happened to you in your family? What was the dynamic that led you to fall into addiction? Can you tell more?
Well, I don't want to blame my family because I feel like they were actors playing their role to a T, and I'm actually grateful. But it's in the family system. I think my great grandfather died of cirrhosis of the liver, which is generally comes along with alcoholism, although it may not be labeled as such. And my father's a genius astrophysicist, but at 7:30 a.m., you used to hear the whiskey bottle uncork and glug, 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 glug. And he was always red-faced and smelled funny, and was happy-go-lucky until he wasn't. My mother placated and soothed herself by overeating, compulsively overeating. And I think I was probably 3 years clean when I put it together that she had been prescribed diet pills. And diet pills back then were speed. So basically, I was raised by an alcoholic and a speed freak doing the best that they could with 5 children. And I was in the middle of that pack. And alcohol was just accepted. But I knew it was a red flag when I took a slug from a wine jug to ask for a raise at work. I was like, there's something wrong with this picture. And my relationships were getting seedier and my goals were getting way beyond me. So I there were red flags, and luckily I got help with those red flags. But yes, my family upbringing was incredibly challenging. And I knew it at the time, but I just focused on what I wanted to do when I left. And I did leave the morning after my high school graduation and ultimately made my way to New York City where I wanted to go.
I see. So where are you from originally? Like, where were you from? From Montana, where you are right now, or is that your home place? Or
So after living in New York City and Los Angeles for
Mhm.
decades and being happy in urban life, I'm in rural bliss. I live in Northwest Montana. I'm about a 5 mile walk from the Canadian border. And believe me, Benji, it wasn't on my bucket list to live in Montana.
Yeah, like my idea for Montana is where they relocate people who are part of the witness protection program. I think there's even a movie about that. People being relocated in Montana for witness protection. So that's why when I think of Montana, I think like it's full of people who are hiding from the mob or any kind of stuff. But I digress. But yeah, so funny thing you mentioned the family. Do you I came in contact recently with that concept called generational trauma, that like the trauma of our parents can be passed down to us. And have you heard of that concept before? Are you familiar with
Oh
it?
yeah, and I've experienced it myself. As I said, it
Mhm.
was in our family lineage, though no one spoke of it
Yeah.
directly.
Hmm.
And in my family, it was hurt and abused children raising hurt and abused children. And it went on for generations. And I'm grateful that I feel like I put a pin in that, at least for my own son and
Yeah.
offspring. And my own trajectory, but I absolutely believe that is true. And alcoholism affects the family. I mean, my first therapist who I went to for help, I walked into his office and I said, "My life is out of control and completely unmanageable." And he immediately started talking about, was there alcoholism in my family? How much did I drink? And I thought, why are you wasting my time with this? Of course, my father drinks. I drank right along with him. I'm happy when I drink. I
Hmm.
didn't understand that this had any effect on me. And he wisely told me to go to meetings to study my father's alcoholism and to go to meetings that for alcoholism as it affects the family to learn about how alcohol may have affected me. And I think it was very savvy. It is a family disease.
Yeah. It's funny. It's very interesting that you say that because me, I come from like a family. I mean, I was raised in Senegal, which is like considered third world country. Both my parents come from like different, like especially my mom from like a very difficult, like, background. And I remember, we don't have alcoholic at my parents' level. Maybe their cousins or like their brothers struggle a little bit with alcohol, but I'm patient zero when it comes to addiction in my family. And yeah, she went through a lot of stuff. And I remember the way I'm the oldest of my family, so the way I was raised was like your life. Should put your life on the line for siblings at any moment, any reason. Like I knew the game plan. If my parents were to suddenly leave this earth, my mom would train me. She would be like, oh, when I ask for something and we don't have the money, my mom would not be like, she'll just show me the bank account, the statement. I'm like, whoa, we're fucking poor. And I was 10 years old, uh, and I understand why she did most of what she did, like, because of the environment I grew up in is very unforgiving. But I felt, before even getting even before being aware of the concept of generational trauma, that I carry anger in me for myself, for the situation I grew up in, but also some kind of anger that was just inherited from her, and what led me to my partly what led me partly to my addiction was that once I came here and graduated college and got my citizenship and everything, I thought that I'd arrive. And thinking that and still be angry, I had no reason to be angry, but I still was. So I didn't know what to do. I was like, okay, time to fit in, try to erase that past of yours that you know, and you start drinking. And it's much after that I understood that, like, you know, I didn't, there was some trauma right there, some family trauma that I needed to deal with, you know. And yeah, that's what I like. But yeah, what about relationships though? When it comes to relationships, how did you fall? You said like I heard you on another podcast. You were like in a very codependent relationship with your ex-husband. Do you want to explore, elaborate on that part?
Yeah, but before we go to codependent relationships,
Yeah.
I really want to address what you've just brought up, which I think is highly significant. I really highly doubt you're the first in your family lineage to suffer from addiction of some type. Your mother obviously had undealt with trauma.
Mhm.
And yes, that was passed down to, I'm sure, you and your other siblings. It's amazing that you're able to stand up, that you have the opportunity to stand up and self-reflect. And it's beautiful and it's exquisite. And I too carry trauma that's goes back beyond my own mother and father, goes back beyond my grandparents, goes back beyond my great grandparents that I am carrying in the cells of my being. That's what I truly believe, and that's what I have experienced in my own recovery. So, bravo to you
Thank you.
for standing up. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
So let's talk about relationships.
Mhm.
So I wanted my father's approval. I was desperate for it. My mother was dangerous. She had, I believe, not only an addiction problem, but I believe her mental health was challenged and her personality would flip on a dime. So she could be incredibly loving. And she was as gifted as Martha Stewart as far as her homemaking abilities. And she was as bright as my astrophysicist father, but she also could turn, and you would not know what you did to cause it, but you would be beaten
Mhm.
to the point of the room spinning and seeing stars. And it was repeated and it was often. So I saw my father as my safety and I wanted his approval. And that too was toxic because my father had his own addiction. And my father viewed me not as a separate human being, but a thing, an object to oogle. And it was an inappropriate boundary, but it's often crossed and often in homes where there is alcoholism and addiction. And I don't blame him. So almost since second grade and Billy Fritz on the playground, I've always wanted attention from men. And I have been in some very unhealthy and toxic relationships. And it results from this fear of abandonment, of neglect, and not being enough, not measuring up in my male partner's eye. And this has been integral. And it didn't matter how successful I was in the workplace, how many accolades I had, how many marathons I ran, how many triathlons I won. It didn't matter. It didn't matter that I carried the weight in my relationships. So I went from New York to Los Angeles. I was offered a job and I thought it was an amazing career move. And it was. But ultimately, I believe I was repositioned in Los Angeles to meet the man who would be my greatest guru. And that man became my ex-husband. And that's an odd thing to say, but that's what I've learned stepping up to this experience. It was the perfect storm. He was supportive. He said all the right things. I thought I had met my Prince Charming. And then as the relationship went on, we decided to marry and make it official and had a son. And I bought our family home and I became more and more drained. And I was using that spiritual axiom. You point one finger out, three fingers come back to you. But what I wasn't acknowledging was I was being drained. I was being abused. And it was covertly. It wasn't overtly. And it was mostly financial. And his weight on me was dragging me down. And it really became obvious when I bought a home for our family and I was caring for our son. And I was responsible for property taxes and improvements. And I was tired and I couldn't speak up. And when I did speak up, there was a manipulation, a gaslighting. Yes. I was, in a relationship with one I perceived to be a narcissist. And I was sober and I was working the steps of a recovery program, which I treasure and I would go back to in a heartbeat if I felt like I was near a drink. And I was a longtime meditator. And I also had this endurance sport ability and I had friends, but I was drowning. So I finally decided to bring up the idea of a post-nuptial agreement. So we went to mediation to create an agreement where he could become fiscally responsible because I didn't want my marriage to end. And I knew intuitively it was past the expiration date and that it was not good for my being, but I wanted my family to stay together. I saw my own family fall apart when I was growing up, and I didn't want that for my son, and I didn't want it for myself. And I was scared, even though all my friends said, "You're so strong. You're so brave. You're so accomplished." I didn't feel that inside. I needed that man to say, "You're okay." And I needed that man to feel safe. And the universe did for me, Benji, what I could not do for myself. We got to that last point of contention for that agreement. And his eyes went in those cold lizard-like slits. And he said, "I'm hiring an attorney and I'm filing for divorce." And that's when the real challenge of my life ensued. He ended up taking up residence in our master bedroom. I took a mattress and moved it to the floor of a partial conversion in our garage in a home I bought and maintained for our family. And that was the billboard that needed to fall on my head to wake me up to what I was saying yes to. And I was long time sober. I was long time in recovery. I was long time examining self. I was long time in meditation. And it took one calendar year in that circumstance. And I held no contact because that's the only way you can deal with a personality such as a narcissist. And I even held no eye contact. And I moved through that year until I was at a point where we came to an agreement and I wrote him his 6-figure check and he could move on. And I'm grateful for that experience. I stayed sober through that experience and I stayed strong through that experience. And it was a gift because it truly showed me how powerful I am as a human being. And it gave me compassion for all I've lived through, my addiction. At 4.5 years clean, I faced clinical depression and had a battle with that for 10 years until I befriended it and learned how to work with it. And now it was narcissistic abuse. And these challenges have actually served me here in this bright, ebullient classroom, as long as I've been willing to step up to it and explore it and get help with it and examine it And I've had incredible soul evolution. And that's what I help people with now, transforming those circumstances, looking at them with new perspective.
That's very amazing, Suzanne. Oh my God, you're definitely a strong woman because like how many stories have we heard of people once, that faces like the end of their marriage or a divorce situation to go back right to the bottle. And sometimes we give those people some slack because it's serious and we understand when those people relapse, but you didn't. You found a way to stay sober. But yeah, staying sober in recovery doesn't mean the end, and so many people say that in the room, doesn't mean the end of facing adversity. Life's there's still gonna throw stuff at you, and it's just the way to deal with it that needs to change. But I wanted to come back to that relationship with your ex-husband. Like, you were clearly the pillar of that relationship, and in a very patriarchal society, especially the one in US, do you think that because men are seen as the provider and of the family, and it's still like a strong image that a lot of men needs to portray, do you think he was jealous of you, of your success, so that's why he tried to undermine you?
Well, no, I believe that. Well, yes, he admitted that. Yes, that is true. But I want to take it a step further.
Mm-hmm.
He was damaged, and he came from a long line of damaged children, raising damaged and hurt children. But unlike you and me, he didn't have the opportunity or take the opportunity to explore it. He created a false persona.
Okay.
And he was living from a false persona. And it's part of what's called narcissism. And so he cannot be responsible. Everything comes from the outside. Everything is sourced from the outside because there's nothing inside. It's empty. And he has to create a persona. And you're always going to be the cause of the issue, the cause of the problem. You will never be able to fix that. You will always be the cause. And once you understand that, and once you understand they are masters of manipulation and you cannot fix it, it's not like alcoholism where you can put the plug in the jug and stay away from it. You cannot fix it. Once you understand that, the most loving thing you can do for yourself and for that individual is to detach and offer no contact.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I see. I agree with that, but I want to abort how as human beings we have that desire to connect. Most people are afraid of ending up alone. People deal with don't deal well with solitude and loneliness, which are two different things, by the way. um and even you, it took you a time. I heard in one of your podcasts that it took a time for you to trust somebody else again. There, especially talk about a man that you you made him wait a long time before even entertaining any kind of friendship or something. Um, what's the process like when you've been hurt by a narcissistic person, but your heart is still telling you to, you know, not not to stay alone or to e- at the end of the day, I understand when people still want to share their life with somebody else. And especially when you're in recovery and you building your support network, it's great to have somebody next to you who understand how you feel. But when you have been burned once, how do you get back on the scene? What was the process for you?
Well, I think it's unique to everyone, but I didn't trust myself after that experience and going through what I did. And I did not want to put my son in a circumstance like that again. So I refrained. I think I had one date in 7 years by choice. It was a mutual friend set us up, and I saw the red flag immediately. And he was a big, flashy Academy Award winning director and Emmy winning producer, and had a huge show at the time. And I saw like even before we went out
Yeah.
on that solo date, I was like, yeah, no, this is red flag. And I was grateful I could see it. And I
Yeah.
went back into my hobbit hole. But ultimately I had to understand that I am my own human being. I am deserving of engagement. I'm deserving of love. And I had to just gently be willing to open my heart again. And so what you're referring to, I was taking a class online. It was COVID. And I met with the individual members. It was people all around the globe by Zoom. And there were 2 that lived in LA. So I invited each of them to coffee and became friends with one who was a gentleman who had lost his wife after a 5-year battle with cancer. And she was diagnosed at stage 3.5. And he was unlike anybody I'd really ever met. He was very intuitive, highly empathic, incredible healer, and just very loving. But I didn't trust him. I was sure that it was another narcissist in
Yeah.
disguise.
Too good to be true, right?
And we were yeah, of course. And I still didn't have trust for myself. You know, in some regard, I still don't. I'm still waiting for that other shoe to drop, even though he's continually proved himself over and over. And we were friends first. And then the universe had other plans. And it was like a magnet force pulling us together. And neither one of us were interested in a romantic relationship. He had the love of his life, his wife of 23 years, go out from cancer. I had who I thought was my love of my life. I wanted to kill him at the end of 16 years. So we were both coming from very different places and very different reasons for not becoming involved in any kind of partnership. But ultimately we said, okay, and knock wood, it's really an incredible experience, and I'm just taking it one day at a time.
Yeah. That's great to hear, like that, and I really pray that that relationship's gonna stay with you, because I believe we deserve, to have somebody else, in life, of course. But what about women who deal with addiction and are unfortunately have trouble staying alone? Like what was what was your how were you able to stay alone and deal? I'm sure you were not lonely, but you were comfortable being alone for the sake of your sanity and also of your children. Because I go to my outpatient program, and a lot of those women cannot deal with being alone. They want some kind of validation. They, sometimes CPS is on the case and it's just too much. And being with someone they always think that it's going to help them. And they go in that merry-go-round of relationships, of codependency, and doesn't seem to be able to stop the circus. Yeah.
Yeah. So you have to remember, we all have our plan before we come in and what we want to experience. And we all have our roadway. Yeah. And that's why there's no judgment on anyone and what they need. And it's a very hard addiction to break. But I'm hoping people won't have to go through having the billboard fall on their head that I had fall on my head. I mean, that was decades. And that was the final storm that woke me up. And what we need to find, or what I've needed to find, let me just speak for myself.
Okay.
Is that compassion for that little one within that has walked through all of this, that has traipsed through the mud and the pain and the degradation and the shame, and is also beloved and full of joy. So it was really necessary for me to come into contact with her and to have profound love and compassion and respect. And that's when it shifted.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was a horrible lesson. It was very hard, but I feel like it was my life lesson. So many elements came together, and that was the truth. And I had to start living from the inside out rather than getting it from the outside in. And I understand why I stood down and away from that for so long, because it is hard to face that, and it is lonely and it is sad, but it's also the greatest triumph once you've walked through it. And there's a lot of help out there. And I also believe I have a tremendous team, as you do, of light surrounding you and cheering you on and leading you forward with those little breadcrumbs and that squeaky little intuitive voice that we sometimes love to shove under the carpet.
Yes.
But let that intuitive voice out.
Yeah.
Because that will lead you.
Like, definitely let that little voice trust your intuition more, because, I'm learning and how to trust my intuition more, but because I'm a scientific, mind guy, software engineer, sometimes when I had a gut feeling, but there was no empirical evidence that somebody was going to do me, dirty or like betray me, I will go against it, because like, they didn't do anything, give them the benefit of the doubt. Right. But then, you said yourself, you heard it, you listened to my episode about the relapse. And now at posteriori, I should have known that that person that I met was a red flag. I had that feeling. There was like, my guard was up when that person who was trying to get sober didn't had any program. I'm not talking AA. I'm not talking like smart. They were just doing it by themselves. And when they went in rehab, they left because they thought that, they could teach the class themselves. And at the time I was like, you know what? Maybe she found a way. I'm not going to try to, because there's no solution fits all for everybody. But I should have known that somebody who's not working the recovery actively is not somebody that I want in my team. And how do you personally know who to keep in your team of support network, or just dismiss them? What's your process?
So I have more tools in my box. So I've been collecting my tools since my mid-20s, and I definitely have tools now. And one of them is taking a breath to find discernment and authentic discernment. So for me, the answer is yes until it's no. So I open to explore, and I hear, and then I decide, am I comfortable with that? How do I really feel? And if I need to sit with it a moment and I don't know the answer, I'll sit with it. And then the answer, it comes. It's that gentle voice again. It comes because I'm giving myself the space and the room and the breath for it. I'm not acting from that addictive place. I'm not safe unless blah, blah, blah. I'm acting from a place of exploration and a place of self-care and a place of nurturing my own being, because I didn't put that being first. It was all about who you wanted me to be. I'll be that person. I was the biggest chameleon, and I had to drop that. That was all fear-based. And it took a long time to learn who that person was and who I could be. And it took all these life experiences. That's why I'm saying it's all good. Embrace it all. And your challenges and your challengers can be some of the biggest gifts, as we know.
Yes.
Painful, excruciating, humbling, but open to that. And that's where I loved what you shared about your relapse, because you were honest. You were bearing your inner being and you were sharing your soul with us. And that will propel you forward. It will. It does.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it wasn't easy because for a moment, like even if it was one night of drinking, what stuck me to the bed was like I went to like a little depressive state of like, oh, now I'm gonna have to explain to like a lot of people what happened. I just wanted to fall asleep and wake up like, everything's gone magically, but it wasn't the case. But thank you for telling me this. All right, now we're about to conclude, but I want to hear about what's going on now with you. How do you help others? Like where we can find you? What's your process? How you help others? What's your service for me?
Well, if you feel pulled to find any more about me, just go to susangold.us. Everything is there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very proud of the book that's been published, Toxic Family, Transforming Childhood Trauma into Adult Freedom. It's my personal and professional story. Some people say it's riveting. I don't know. I think it's a strong and powerful story, but what really is helpful is the workbook in the appendix. It's exercises that I've used and still use to help me traverse this life journey we're on. And it's having profound effect on people. It's very moving. So there's the book. And then I do one-to-one coaching, and I'll be doing workshops and retreats because I want to share Montana with everyone. There is magic and there is beauty here. There's probably witnesses in protection mode out in the back fields too. But, so that's that. And I'm not selling it. You'll know if it's for you. You'll just know, and you'll go to the website and it's all there. And I strongly recommend, especially for your listeners, for people that are getting clean or experiencing sobriety or freedom from addiction. It's pretty laid out in my book, and I think it might be a really fascinating read.
I still have to read it, and I plan on it. But yeah, I'm gonna share your contacts to your on the episode description. Yeah, and so it was a pleasure talking to you, Suzanne. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. And to you, Benji, and thank you for everything that you're doing. I know it takes effort.
Mm-hmm.
It takes time. It takes finances. It takes production to put out the conversations that you are. And you're really helping others. You helped me listening to the episodes that I have. And like I said, I've been sober since before you're born, but you've given me such a gift. And I'm really grateful. And this has been a high privilege to be here talking with you today.
Oh man. Thank you very much for all the accolades. All right, guys, I will see you later for the conclusion. Well, that's it, folks. Big thank you to Suzanne for being my guest. Very insightful episode on the importance of family dynamic for someone who is in recovery. I shared the link to her book, Toxic Family, in the description. Please give it a read. As always, please follow us on social media and support our Patreon page. And guys, I will see you next week. Bye.